It was a busy weekend with news. Brett Kavanaugh is accused of sexual assault again. I have to conform to my audience, and since I don't get a lot of comments, I have to conform to the one guy who's got comments, and so I have to make sure that my podcast is of the right length. A little bit more on that later. I'll have to wait on Iran until tomorrow. This is Gene, and you're listening to Dumbasses Talking Politics. Could we be going to war with Iran? Possibly, but we're not going to find out tonight because I've got to do the right thing when it comes to doing this podcast. So, you remember there was this guy a while back named Alistair? Yeah, his name was actually Dave. And I didn't want him getting mad because I didn't want him getting assaulted. Because, you know, Dave sat back, he listens to the podcast, he's a really good friend, and I love the guy to death. But Dave told me, you know something, I can't listen to your hour-long podcast. So right now, I have to cut, thanks to Dave, I have to cut my podcast to about 30 minutes. Because Dave's ADHD will not cooperate with him so he could listen to the hour-long podcast. Or here's something wild and crazy, actually listen to part of the podcast and then listen to the rest later, which is what most normal people do. But whatever. I love Dave. And I never wanted to use his name simply because if I sat back and talked about transgenders in a way that would really tick people off, I did not want him to be targeted. But since there are like 16 people that listen to this whole thing, I'm going to say this. Men who mutilate their genitalia and say they're women are still men. Okay? So audience, go after Dave. No problem. Anyway, the other thing is, I can tell I'm in America. I'm actually doing this podcast from bed. I am sitting, I went to Amazon.com, an American company. I bought a bed desk, which was made in China. But, I mean, it's an American company. It's made out of bamboo, which is why I know it's made in China. I'm actually doing this off my Dell, which was made in China. But it's a Texas company. And doing this from an Nokia microphone, which is a Japanese company. But anyway, the point is, this is America. I can sit back and do a podcast from bed while watching a movie on my Amazon Fire. Yes, the Amazon Fire. After watching pro football. Browns won, by the way. They beat the Jets. I don't know. It was 23-6. I stopped watching. And America is a beautiful place. I absolutely love it. So anyway, let's talk about Brett Kavanaugh, and if we have some time, and if Dave will allow me to actually discuss it, we'll talk about Iran. I don't think we're going to have time for Iran. I think we're just going to have to go through... We're going to have to go through Brett Kavanaugh. This is a really, really, really disturbing story. The reality is the left cannot deal with the fact that Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh, and they keep coming up with garbage to try and bury him. And I mean, it is literally garbage. Hot, stinking garbage. Like garbage in New York City during 90 degree heat and 100% humidity garbage. It is just really, really, really bad. On Saturday, the New York Times published a report that accused Brett Kavanaugh of another sexual assault. this gets a little confusing, so please stay with me. It's a little bit out there. And the reason it's confusing and a little bit out there is because this was something that happened 30 years ago while he was in college. I mean, there were some things that happened to this guy that happened in high school. Seriously. A guy named Max Stier said that he was at a party at Yale. Everyone was drunk, and Brett Kavanaugh pulled his stuff out of his pants. Then some guy grabbed Kavanaugh's stuff and stuck it in the hand of the, quote, victim, end quote. Apparently, Stier gave an interview to two reporters who were writing a book about Kavanaugh's accusers. This accusation closely mimicked the accusation by Deborah Ramirez. She said that he had actually pulled his stuff out of his pants and did whatever he does with his stuff out of his pants without a girlfriend. I don't know. The FBI knew about the accusation, so this was not really a new accusation. They knew about this accusation during the confirmation hearings, and apparently they, quote, failed to investigate it, end quote. Mind you, failed to investigate it is not... They didn't investigate it because it ended up being BS. There are a few things that stink to high heaven here. First off, Max Stier is a left-winger who supported Bill Clinton. He actually worked for Bill Clinton. His ex-wife was nominated to the federal court by Barack Obama. So right off the bat, you got to say, "Oh, here we go." The people at the party that supposedly Kavanaugh had some guy do. We're gonna get to that part in a second. The people at the party don't remember anything that happened. So the guy who supposedly grabbed Brett Kavanaugh's junk did not remember grabbing Brett Kavanaugh's junk. Either he was really, 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 really drunk, or it just flat out didn't happen. But we'll get to that in a second. Then it gets better. So the victim doesn't seem to know that she was a victim because she said she didn't recall anything like that happening. Maybe she was traumatized. I don't know. But the victim would not be interviewed by the press or law enforcement. She said, no, not going to happen. The book, now here's where the thing gets really weird. The book where the incident is based on even said there were no eyewitness testimony or proof that it ever happened. The victim would not be interviewed for the book. Nothing. Ugh. Here we go again. Kavanaugh's friends said that Kavanaugh was popular at Yale. He was someone who was big. And if this ever happened with Kavanaugh, it would have been all over the Yale campus. That's another thing that came out that just doesn't work in this whole thing. But it also doesn't make sense logically. Let's take a look at this in a deeper sense. Brett Kavanaugh graduated with honors from Yale. Folks, Yale. One of the top schools, not in the country, in the world. I'm pretty sure he was busy most of the time keeping his 4.0 or 5.0 grade point average at Yale. He was never accused of anything then and through his federal judgeships. So in other words, this guy went through college, got his BS, BA, got his MA, never was accused, then became a lawyer, became a judge, became a federal judge, and became a judge in the second highest court in the country. And this entire time, he was never accused of anything. The second they want to make him a Supreme Court judge, and by the way, he's not that conservative. Let's call it what it is. I'm actually not impressed with the guy. I personally think there were better judges. This was not the best judge. Ben Shapiro's podcast had him ranked 5th. He was not the greatest judge here. But the reality is, this guy went through everything until he became a Supreme Court judge. By the way, had 7 FBI investigations on him, because that's what's required. No one said a thing. He's going to be a Supreme Court judge that, might not like a Roe versus Wade, might overturn Roe versus Wade. And by the way, all of the evidence points that he would have never overturned Roe versus Wade. He is literally a judge who follows precedents. He doesn't follow the Constitution, which is why a lot of people didn't want him. He follows precedents. So even though Roe versus Wade is not in the Constitution, he would not have overturned it simply because there was precedence. Even though Roe versus Wade is an absolute garbage law. So Brett Kavanaugh decided to be a serial rapist in college and then just stopped? How is that logical? How does that even make any sense? Brett Kavanaugh, if you're a serial rapist, you got to remember that one broad that Michael Avenatti brought in sat there and said that he used to line men up to rape women, including the chick he actually set up. And by the way, I mean chick and broad in the lowest sense. I do not respect these people. These are garbage human beings. And I'm going to call garbage human beings. And if you get really mad, remember, the guy who made this 30 minutes long is Dave. Okay, so you find him. Go. Because this was probably going to be about an hour. And then Dave made it 30 minutes longer. Okay, 30 minutes short. So, hey, if you love this podcast, you should already know. Anyway, so, in other words, Brett Kavanaugh decided to be a serial rapist for a while and then quit. No one is accusing him in the last 10 years. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. No one's accusing him in the last 20 years. They're accusing him 30 to 40 years ago. Brett Kavanaugh is not a young pup. He actually has been around a while. Just absolutely asinine. There's nothing here. Absolutely nothing here. Well, the New York Times had to make a revision on Sunday, stating that no one, including the victim, could substantiate the story. Oops. Apparently, the book, even though they do mention the problem, the book also said that there is no substantiation, there were no witnesses, no one could be interviewed from the party, the theoretical party. Nothing could be done at this point. So the New York Times decided, we better actually go in there and change the story. There's a shocker. Isn't it amazing that when everyone says that news publications make mistakes, and they do. All of them do. Fox News does, CNN does, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Examiner. But do you realize that all of the mistakes are always on one side of the aisle? There's never a mistake where, well, Hillary Clinton was accused of this and she didn't actually do it, and we have evidence. It's never made that way. Never made that way. It's always on one side. So I'm sorry if the New York Times made a mistake. I don't care. The New York Times made a mistake. The New York Times has to realize. I would think it really refreshing if the New York Times would just sit there and say, hey, we're a leftist magazine. We're not actually a newspaper. I respect MSNBC. I respect Rachel Maddow. And the reason I do is because they're leftists and they admit they're leftists. Even that guy with the hair, I don't know, on MSNBC, Joe Scarborough. Okay, you're an ass. I don't like hearing you. I feel like I've got a pike in my head every time I listen to it, the guy. But the reality is he's a leftist and he admits it. So, okay, good for you. CNN? Oh my God. New York Times? Oh my God. These folks are telling you the news. They lie. It's terrible. And then when they mess up, it's always to one side. Well, okay, we made a mistake with the Donald Trump story. Why didn't you make a mistake with the Hillary Clinton story? They'll never admit that because you know something? They'll never publish anything negative about Hillary Clinton or anyone else. Well, the Democratic presidential candidates, even with the New York Times revision on Sunday, less than 24 hours after the initial story, still did what they do. They made asses out of themselves. Is it one of the Democrats are represented by a mule mascot? I don't think so. And it's not a mule mascot, it's a jackass. Let's call it what it is. Their reactions, even after the New York Times revision, I'll say that again, were priceless and expected. And I think the big problem is these guys really wanted to come first. So let's take a look at some of them. Kamala Harris, what did she say? On Twitter, which by the way is like the worst place to get your news or anything. On Twitter, Kamala Harris said, quote, I sat through those hearings. Brett Kavanaugh lied to the U.S. Senate and most importantly to the American people. He was put on the court through a sham process, and his place on the court is an insult to the pursuit of truth and justice. He must be impeached. End quote. Yeah, okay, good for you. She has sat back and threw more black people in prison in California when she was Attorney General than anyone. Big freaking hypocrite. As a matter of fact, she doesn't believe that nonviolent criminals should be thrown in prison, so I'm not exactly sure why she's flipping out about it. Okay, here's Elizabeth Warren, Chief Elizabeth Warren. Quote, last year, the Kavanaugh, and she didn't use a comma there. Oh my God, she's from Harvard. She's a lawyer from Harvard, and she doesn't know how to use punctuation. That's awesome. But that's probably because of her American Indian heritage. So, last year, it should be a comma. The Kavanaugh nomination was rammed through the Senate without a thorough examination of the allegations against him. Confirmation is not exoneration. She put a comma there. I don't know why she did that. But anyway, confirmation, comma, which shouldn't be there. And these newest revelations, if she's going to use the comma, she should have used it here, are disturbing. Like the man who appointed him, Kavanaugh should be impeached. Okay, there are a bunch of things that are just not good here. First off, it wasn't rammed through the Senate. It was one of the longest confirmation processes that the Senate has ever experienced. It took forever. Without a thorough examination of allegations, no, that's not true. He was actually investigated 6 times by the FBI, 7 times if you actually take the investigation during the confirmation. Confirmation is not exoneration, does not mean anything. Guilt and innocence. Guilt, you're guilty because you have been proven guilty. Innocence is innocence. If you are not found guilty, you are innocent and you are exonerated. This is a woman who studied law. Now, mind you, it was real estate law or whatever it was in Harvard. You'd think she'd know that. Confirmation is not exoneration, but no proof of guilt is exoneration. And these news revelations are disturbing. These are not new revelations. These came out back when he was being nominated. Why is she even talking like this? And like the man who appointed him, Kavanaugh should be impeached. The Democrats have impeachment on the brain. This is going to be their... You know something? I want them to impeach Trump. I want them to impeach Kavanaugh. This is not a good thing. The Democrats do not actually have a handle on the way society is right now. Now, here's the thing. Leftists love this kind of language. There aren't that many leftists. There really aren't. There's a lot of liberals, but there are a lot of progressives, but there aren't that many leftists. And this is where they are going to get killed. So let's listen to Julian Castro. Now, the only reason I'm bringing Julian Castro up is because I found the tweet and I could post it at dumbassestalkingpolitics.com so that you can actually read it under the show notes. But Julian Castro said, it's more clear than ever that Brett Kavanaugh lied under oath. He should be impeached. Okay, Brett Kavanaugh doesn't know any of any accusations. So it's not clear that he ever lied. And if he doesn't know what he's going to be accused of, how could he lie? And Congress should review the failure of the Department of Justice to properly investigate the matter. That's interesting because now they're going after Trump. They're going after William Barr. So, whatever. Oh, I just thought of something. You know why that's interesting? Because the DOJ is about to release the report on the FISA application. Now, it could be released next week. It won't be. Or it could be released in a month. But I have a feeling they need to vilify the DOJ. So just listen to that and listen to what it is. Okay? Because I have a feeling that's going to be kind of a big deal in the future. We're going to... Cory Booker. Angry Eyes Cory Booker. Why is this guy in the... He's got like 1% of the vote. So let's go for this. Brett Kavanaugh, quote, Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation should have never happened in the first place. It was a result of a broken process designed by Senate Republicans to brush aside deeply troubling and credible allegations. Okay, these are a lot of big words, but the confirmation process was not designed by Republicans. It's been around for 250 years? Is this guy freaking kidding? He's so dumb. Come on. If you guys have any interest in Cory Booker, besides the fact that, he screwed up Newark, New Jersey, and Newark, New Jersey should have been kind of screwed up? Whatever. Okay, let's continue the quote. This new allegation, it's not a new allegation, an additional corroborating evidence, there's no corroborating evidence whatsoever. The victim said nothing happened. Adds to a long list of reasons why Brett Kavanaugh should not be a Supreme Court Justice. If there was corroborating evidence, yes, that would mean he shouldn't be Justice of the United States. Gotcha. I stand with survivors, in other words, we're going to believe people with no evidence, and countless other Americans in calling for the impeachment proceedings to begin. Well, here's the thing. Please start the impeachment proceedings. Please. Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke, actually had another comment. I wasn't interested. I couldn't find it on YouTube, and I said, screw it. Not interested. Done. So, I just, whatever. Vox.com, though, did have, and I read this morning, Vox.com had like 4 different stories about how Brett Kavanaugh is Satan. I thought that was only interesting because it really shows how messed up the media is right now. And I was going to use an expletive, but I stopped. Because Dave might have his kids in the car, and even though I want Dave to be attacked by pro-trans people who hate Brett Kavanaugh, I don't want his kids to hear me cussing, so we're going to be okay there. But here's the thing. President Trump, he just can't stay out of his way. He can't just, I'm just not going to talk. I'm just going to sit there, let Democrats make asses out of themselves, which they did, and he's got to say something. But here's the thing. I don't think what he tweeted, I wish he'd just walk up to a cameraman and say this. Okay? Donald Trump, via tweet, said, Brett Kavanaugh should start suing people for libel, or the Justice Department should come to his rescue. The lies are told about him are unbelievable. False accusations without recrimination. When does it stop? They are lying to influence his opinions. Can't let that happen. End quote. This is actually a really interesting quote. And I think Donald Trump has really hit it here. Let's talk about this. There's been a lot of talk about John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice, appointed by George W. Bush, H.W., I don't know, whichever, the latest Bush. Okay. And suddenly, John Roberts is voting very liberal. Well, here's the thing. John Roberts is kind of thin-skinned. And John Roberts has been lambasted by the media. Is it possible that the media is trying to get to our Supreme Court judges by talking crap about him? This was something that was brought up by Ben Shapiro today when I was listening to his podcast on the Daily Wire. I'm a subscriber. You should subscribe. It's absolutely awesome. It literally kills 8 hours of work a day. Trust me. Dave, you're my boss. Please don't listen to this, or Alistair, or whatever, even though I hope that people start stalking you. But anyway, it is something to think about. Is the left trying to get into the minds of the... Now, John Roberts was not a great pick. Everyone said it when he was picked. He was very moderate. Not to mention he's an anti-Trumper. Brett Kavanaugh is also extremely moderate. And a lot of people said that. They wanted Amy Barrett as a Supreme Court Justice. I wanted Amy Barrett as a Supreme Court Justice. She's very conservative. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being a conservative. Montemayor, Kagan, These people are far leftists. What is her name? Notorious R.G. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She couldn't be any more left as she needed to be. There is a thought, and what Trump's bringing up in this whole thing is making it so that the media attacks the justices themselves so that it actually manipulates their rulings. Has it worked with Roberts? I don't think so. I think that's a pipe dream, to be honest with you. Has it worked with Roberts? No. Roberts was already very moderate, and a lot of people thought, this isn't a great Chief Justice pick. So, I wasn't a fan of Roberts. I wasn't a fan of Kavanaugh. I thought Kavanaugh was way too moderate. I thought Kavanaugh, and one of his criticisms was that this is a guy who really looks at precedents and honors precedents. And that's a problem. Because precedence is not always right. For example, Jim Crow was precedence. That's a good law. Roe versus Wade is precedence. It's a crappy law when it comes to abortion. So I'm not a big fan of precedents. I'd rather you sit back, read the Constitution. If it's not in the Constitution, you kick it back to the states. That's simple. Roe versus Wade should have been applied to the Constitution, literally, which is what I am. I am a constitutionalist. I believe word for the Constitution. Roe versus Wade should have been read, and it should have been said, listen, it's not in the Constitution. We're not making that decision. We're going to kick it back to the 50 states. Let them make the decision. California is a pro-abortion state. I'm anti-abortion. California is a pro-abortion state. That's fine. California has decided to make abortion legal. Great. At least it's the state's decision. But when you make it a federal decision, I think the Supreme Court really oversteps their bounds. And I think that the left knows that. That's why whenever, listen, there's going to be at least, Trump's going to win 2020. I'm going to call this right now. If Trump can shut his mouth for 5 minutes, he's going to win 2020. He doesn't even need to shut his mouth that much. He's going to win 2020. No question. But when Trump wins 2020, there's going to be at least one, possibly two Supreme Court nominees. It's going to make the court towards conservatism. It's going to be a conservative court. And it's going to be a conservative court for the next generation. And I think that there are going to be a couple of serious justices that retire. Ginsburg, I don't know what's keeping that gal alive. She's going to retire if Trump wins in 2020. And I think we're probably going to lose one of our conservative justices. I think, what's his name? I can't remember his name. The black guy. I've been watching football, so I've been drinking. But I think he is going to retire. And I think Trump's going to replace him with two conservatives. So I think it's going to be 5-4. The left has always threatened to pack the court. And if you don't know what packing the court means, it means, you know what? There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't add more Supreme Court justices. And I think that's what they're going to try and do. Because here's the thing. The left cheats. Let's call it what it is. They cheat. They manipulate. There have been, and I can't do this because of frickin' Dave, but, and I'm already over the 30-minute mark. I'm going to stop this soon. But I think that the the courts. I'm really scared for our future because it seems like the left is really cheating now. They're manipulating our elections. Look at California. California, they're already talking about the elections. How did California end up losing Republicans in Republican counties? I don't know. Packing the court doesn't sound like something the Democrats won't do. So how can we deal with it? Keep dumping in conservative judges and making sure that Trump knows what's going on. And Trump has basically said, hey, you know something? Stay with us. Don't be like Roberts. Roberts was an anti-Trump guy. Let's call it what it is. But Kavanaugh, he's not an anti-Trump guy, but maybe he's thin-skinned and he doesn't like the press coverage. And maybe he thinks the best way to handle it is just to agree with him. That's got to stop. Okay, you can follow me on Twitter at RunninFool, RUNNINFEWL. Visit my show notes over on dumbassestalkingpolitics.com. You can download or listen to this podcast on the iTunes podcast, the Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Podcast Addict, and tomorrow morning it will be YouTube. This is Gene, and you've listened to Dumbasses Talking Politics.